Okay, everybody, I'm going to assume that those who are here can hear us in the webinar, and we will make a start. So good morning and welcome to our June Manna webinar event. My name is Dr. Dan Wadsworth. I'm an academic at the University of the Sunshine Coast, and I'm a postdoc fellow at the Manna Institute. I'm also the lead of the HDR community of practice within Manna, and I'm going to be moderating today's session. Before we start, I'd like to do an acknowledgement to country as we open up all of our Manna Institute sessions with. Manna respectfully acknowledges the First Nations peoples as the continuing custodians of this continent and pays respects to elders past, present and emerging. The Institute honours their rich cultural heritage, beliefs and enduring relationship to the lands and communities in which we all live, learn and work. Today, I come to you from Gubbi Gubbi country, where the Gubbi Gubbi people were recently recognised as native title holders over the Sunshine Coast lands. And please feel free to mention where you're joining us today in the chat. So the Manna Institute is a virtual institute formed by the Regional Universities Network, also known as the RUN Network, which is made up of 7 universities, which are University of New England, our foundation member, Federation University, CQU, Charles Sturt University, Southern Cross University, the University of the Sunshine Coast, where I'm based, and the University of Southern Queensland. Our foundation partners are Everymind, Lifeline Direct, Lifeline Research Foundation and the Centre for Mental Health Research at ANU. And at Manna, we have some of the leading researchers and industry partners working with rural, regional and remote Australian communities to improve their mental health and well-being. And Manna supports meaningful research, fosters the development of professional workforces and translates research findings into practical place-based programs. A large part of Manna's focus is around building research capacity in rural regional Australia, and that makes this session really, really pertinent today. So today's webinar will be a conversation between some established and emerging academics around a topic which should be on all of our minds, how to best support rural and regional PhD students. And joining me today in the conversation are Dr. Catherine Picton and Miss Riarna Hellyer from the University of Sunshine Coast Student Engagement and Success Team, and Associate Professor Kate Mulgrew from UniSC's School of Health. Kat is the Associate Director of Student Engagement and Success in Student Services at the University of the Sunshine Coast, and her research interests are around student support, student advising and student engagement. Kat completed a postdoc fellowship at UniSC, co-conducting a longitudinal study on the experiences of students at regional universities. And in a previous role, Kat was a project manager for the RUN Network, investigating academic student success, advising through academic and professional staff collaborations. She's also been involved in several research projects investigating equity and the Australian regional context of higher education. Welcome, Kat. Thanks for joining us today. Our second speaker will be Ms. Riarna Hellyer. And Riarna is a PhD candidate, coordinator of the Undergraduate Research Fellowship and Student Senate Admin at UniSC. Riarna's work seeks to engage undergraduate students in research and provide professional development and community engagement opportunities for postgraduate students. So really seeding that pipeline. Riarna's research aims to develop a business-to-business customer experience scale for the professional service industry. And then thirdly, we have Associate Professor Kate Mulgrew, who is, as of 2 days ago, the Acting Dean of Graduate Research at UniSC. So congratulations, Kate. We're shifting your role. Prior to this, she was the School of Health HDR Coordinator and has also held other research leadership positions, including Deputy Head Research and Acting Head of School for the School of Health and Behavioural Sciences at UniSC. Her programme of research centres on ways to improve body image and reduce harmful social media content. So I'm sure you'll agree we've got 3 fantastic speakers to talk to us today about this topic of supporting rural and regional PhD students. If you have any questions as we go along, please either pop them in the chat or feel free to ask them at the end when we all stop the recording. I'm going to lead a chat now with Kat, Riarna and Kate, and then I'll speak a little bit about how Manna supports our HDR students. So first up, we're going to come to Kat. Kat, how does student engagement theory apply to research students?
Oh, great question, Dan, and really delighted to be joining my colleagues today to talk about all things to do with our HD students. And I guess that my research background is mostly with first-year students, but absolutely within the regional context. And in my current role in my operational space, it really spans both undergraduates, but also postgraduate students too. So I think anecdotally, I have a really growing experience of what that student experience looks like for all of our students. So I really wanted to talk about, and those that know me know that you never get away with talking to me without me mentioning the Framework of Student Engagement by Kahua Nelson, and that's really what a lot of my research work is based upon. So many of you might already be familiar with that, but I really wanted to talk about it as a lens for our HD students and student engagement and how we might support them. So I first wanted to touch on the types of engagement that are represented in the Framework of Student Engagement. And the first one is emotional engagement, how we inspire interest and enthusiasm in our learners. And that's something that I think really goes across all learning experiences, even in terms of lifelong learning for researchers going into their new careers. And then thinking about behavioural engagement as well. How do we help students to want to put time and effort into their study? How do we encourage them to participate in their learning in terms of behavioural engagement? And finally, cognitive engagement, that really deep learning space, and something that I'm really interested in, the transfer of knowledge over different spaces that students might study in. But another part of the framework, it really talks about what are the influences on student engagement. And this is the part that I think is a really shared space for all students. And I often just reflect in my own life as a researcher and someone who works full time that the framework of student engagement still largely applies to me because of the types of things that as humans influence us. So Kahua and Nelson talk about really fixed structural influences on the student experience. So things like university policy that's really fixed. The students come into our environment and that's not something that they can really change, or that they can't change that quickly. And something that I thought of that's quite a fixed structural influence as well is the way that a thesis examined, that there are particular rules around how an RHD program might unfold. So they're really very structural issues that students don't necessarily have a lot of control over. And then for students, there might be influences that come from outside of their study as well that are quite structural influences. So background factors that might challenge the way they're able to engage in their learning. They might be financial barriers, they could be geographical factors, and particularly for regional students, thinking about some of the infrastructure that might be in place for them to be able to engage in their study, they could be barriers. Kahua and Nelson also talk about the psychosocial influences that students have on their study as well. So that could be things like, again, university influences, the quality of teaching or the quality of supervision that students might have that can really deeply engage or possibly disengage if they're not getting quite what they want out of their supervisor. And from a student perspective, it could be things like what was their motivation to choose this particular area of study, and that can really impact their emotional engagement and their drive to continue in that area. And all of these types of factors have the power to be either positive influences on student engagement, but they can also be negative influences. And that's when we start to see students disengaging from their learning. So that's the space that I'm really interested in thinking about for postgrad students. How do we think about the different types of influences that might have and how that might influence their engagement?
Thank you, Kat. I found Kahua Nelson's engagement framework so affirming when I actually came across it, because it's like, all of this stuff that I'm doing as an educator and as a keen, I'm trying to look after my students, it's actually really, really important, and it's more important than just being a good person. There's actually things that underlie it. And so to see it in that formalized way was really, really good. I love that framework. So what are some of the things that can trigger engagement?
Yeah, this is, I guess, where I came into the research work with Kahua and Nelson. They had established the framework of student engagement, which was really conceptual, and what they had wanted to do through both Ella, Kahua, and my postdoctoral study was we wanted to empirically demonstrate that framework in action. And they had theorized an educational interface, and within that interface, there were 4 key pathways to engagement. So what they had theorized was that some of the factors that I've just talked about, like great supervision, for instance, or background factors that might present challenges for students, those things can really directly impact engagement. But there's other things that might also indirectly influence engagement. And I think that these 4 pathways to engagement can be really powerful for us to think about how we might be able to, for all students, impact engagement in different ways. So the 4 pathways are belonging, self-efficacy, emotions, and well-being. And if we see them as if we're able to trigger those pathways, we're able to engage students more deeply in their learning. And there still will be the cycles of direct engagement, but I guess it gives us these extra opportunities to think how we might engage students. So I think for RHD students, their sense of belonging is perhaps a little different than first year students. So first year students often, and certainly in the longitudinal study that we did, first year students often talk about a sense of belonging in terms of their peers, that they're in their early few weeks of their study, they're very focused on making friendships with people. And then as the weeks go on, they start thinking about, how do I connect to my teaching staff? This relationship is quite different than it is with my teachers from perhaps previous learning experiences. For RHD students, it's really an extended concept of connection, and it's really around the relationship you have with your supervisor, the relationship you have with that sort of broader extended research team or the networks that you have as part of your research. But it's also a really deep and early connection to the area that they're studying and potentially then the industry that their research is attached to. And then this developing sense of themselves as future researchers as well. So that's one I think that we can really build on in terms of building that sense of belonging in order to more deeply engage students. I also wanted to talk about self-efficacy. I did my own PhD at a regional university quite a few years ago now. And I think that, for me, it's probably quite a common experience for research students to kind of have imposter syndrome. And I certainly had that a lot through my own PhD. And my supervisor had said to me sort of very early on, maybe in the first 8 months or something, that one day I would know more about my topic than he did. And, he was a very well-regarded researcher. And I thought that day's never going to come. But of course it did. And through his mentorship, I started to really own that space of my own research and really sort of incrementally built my self-efficacy over that long period of time, so that when it got to the point where I had to submit my thesis, and I'm not going to say that that was an easy task, but I certainly had built up the self-efficacy for that task and the confidence to be able to move forward. So I think self-efficacy, working on that over a period of time is really, really important. And I think that anybody who engages in any type of research can attest it is an emotional roller coaster. And I think that it's really important for us to think about, how do we trigger positive emotions for students, because we know that's such an important part of how they're engaging. And a couple of things that I thought of that were really important to me in my journey were bringing a sense of joy to the research. And that's probably not going to happen every day, but I think that how do we bring joy to the learning experience that is research? How do we set milestones where students can experience a sense of satisfaction along the way? And I think it's really as much about the outcome as it is about that journey and showing care and an investment in the people that we're working with in terms of research. And of course, the last pathway to engagement is wellbeing. When I have talked about these other pathways, I've talked about it in terms of how we can see these pathways in a really positive way. But for wellbeing, we absolutely can trigger wellbeing in a positive way. But what we do know is that research can be really stressful. And Riarna will talk about the undergraduate research fellowship in a moment, but we were both just at a research forum this week where a student there talked about his honours nearly emotionally breaking him. So we know it is really challenging. And the piece that I guess that I'm really, really interested in is, how do we teach wellbeing in the sense of how are we really proactive and embedded in our approach to wellbeing that's continuous throughout all student journeys, and bringing a health promotion lens to that work, so that we're equipping people with those challenges that are going to that are going to sit ahead of them, and to position them really well to get through those really hard times. And in our research as well, what we found was, if we were able to trigger one of those pathways, it often triggered other pathways, which then enhanced that experience for students and helped them to more deeply engage.
Thank you, Kat. Certainly many of those elements ring true with my own experience as a PhD student as well, even if it was overseas. But and the wellbeing was the thing that first drew me towards Ella's framework. So if we're thinking about how we look from a regional lens, what insights can you share about how regional universities talk about their research experiences? We know it's really important to hear about the good and bad experiences that other people are having.
Yeah, and look, I think that one of the things that really struck me when I was at the research forum the other day, we had a panel of students who had engaged in undergraduate research and their pathway had been to go on to postgraduate research. So they had this really sort of dual experience. And what I was interested to understand from them was what were the skills that they had been developing across their journey as an undergrad student that had set them up really well to be a postgrad student. And it was really interesting that what they talked about were what I guess some people might call soft skills. I would like to call them cross-disciplinary skills that travel with them through different aspects of their study. So one of the things they talked a lot about was, again, that navigation of how they build relationships with their supervisor. And I think of KIF's transition pedagogy, which often is really applied to undergraduate students. But I think this is a really useful lens for us in universities to talk about what that experience looks like. And Gail and Parker talk about transition as becoming. So rather than being sort of a fixed time where students go through transition at the beginning of their study, in reality, students are in a constant cycle of transition to different levels of study, different areas that they might be interested in. And then, of course, that continues to happen in their research journey. So I think bringing a lens of something like transition as becoming into the postgrad space is a really useful way for us to start talking about that experience, because I think while students obviously are very focused on their area of study, it's these other aspects of the student experience that kind of get them through that process. It's that development of skill. And other things that they talked about as well were being able to have sort of much more immediate feedback than they could in their undergraduate degree. So really thinking about how do we have those high quality conversations where we're moving students from the student supervisor relationship to people who are collaborators and co-designers of research projects, and that's a shift for students as well. And this is part of those high quality conversations that we have that builds the self-efficacy for students and triggers engagement. So I think that in my current role, having engaged in conversations recently with postgrad students, I'm really interested for us to consider that framework of student engagement and particularly how we trigger those pathways, because I think we focus very much on how we directly engage students across those three dimensions. But I'd like to just take that one step back and look for other opportunities, particularly around positive emotions, that care and the joy that we bring to study, and that wellbeing dimension as well.
Yeah, I wrote down your quote to bring a sense of joy to the research, because I think that's a mantra that all of our supervisors should be looking to, well, to follow ourselves, never mind anything else. But yeah, when supporting our students, we should certainly be looking to bring that when we can. Okay, Riarna, let's move on to you, and we'll invite some questions for Kat as you go along. If anyone wants to chuck any in the Q&A or in the chat, they should both now be working. Riarna, to begin with, could you tell us a bit more about the undergraduate research fellowship that you're involved in running at UniSC, and how this program specifically can support rural and regional students to begin to engage in research opportunities?
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for having me today. So I believe when it comes to research is a journey, right? For myself, this started in undergraduate and it's gone all the way through to my PhD today, and it'll go onwards afterwards as well. So I think one of the ways we can support our future HDR students or postgraduate research students is to really engage them in a supportive research culture, a culture from undergraduate, from the get-go. So the Undergraduate Research Fellowship is essentially a co-curricular opportunity for undergraduate students in their second year onwards to engage in real research projects with academics at UniSC. Projects last between 6 to 12 weeks. And students are provided with a $1,000 scholarship that's tied to 3 milestones. So we've had a range of topics during the fellowship. Some of these have included religion's effect on healthcare, digitizing biomechanics and animals. We've got sustainability claims in dairy and promoting positive mental health. So we've really looked at a range of topics that may be interesting to students and really giving them an opportunity to dip their toes into research. Is this something for them? Build those transferable skills and perhaps consider a future pathway in the research space. So how it works is academics will submit their projects, they'll apply, it goes through a panel, and once that's approved, students have the opportunity to apply as well. So that's kind of just that really brief overview on it. But how this may support rural regional students would really be, from the get-go, we've really tried to provide a targeted approach to ensuring that our rural, regional, remote students feel supported to come forward with this opportunity. I think there is kind of a perspective for some students that if an opportunity is provided at a university, even if there is online components, it's not for me. Like, that's not for me. The only thing that is here for me is maybe student success, well-being, and my classes. My lecturers are here for me, and that's what's here. So we've really tried to provide, targeted emails, educating them about the process. Here's what it is. It is here for you. We ensure our academics, if they are putting forward a program, that if possible, they do provide an online option, so students know that they could engage with the program in an online capacity, and it isn't restricted to Sippy Downs or Moreton Bay. We also have recently removed the 5.0 GPA requirement, which we used to have. Obviously, that's reflective of honours. To complete an honours, you do need a GPA 5, but these are through consultation and kind of analysing students that may be coming through and may be interested, we found that there were a few students who were in that 4.8, 4.5. They weren't quite hitting that mark, and quite a few of those students were rural, regional, or Indigenous low SES. And we didn't want to put up this barrier to entry on something which was someone's first taste. If you're in your second year and you don't complete till fourth year and you're at a 4.8, there's plenty of time to dive into your studies, knowing that that 5.0 is required of you at the end of it if you're wanting to go into honours. So through that, so targeted emails, lowering the barrier to entry through the GPA, we now instead ask that they speak to their academics and get a letter of recommendation to put in with their application. But we also have spoken with and partnered with careers employability team who assist students if they request in developing their application as well. So perhaps their resume is not up to scratch, or they've never written an application for, they're not sure what they could offer a research project. The careers employability team is fantastic in helping them through that process as well. So since we've kind of implemented that, we have seen an increase in rural, regional, remote interest. We also hold info sessions so they can jump in, they can say g'day, learn more about it kind of in a face-to-face capacity, even if it is digitally, and also ask those questions. We find a lot of students, the number one question I get is, are you sure I'm allowed to apply for this? It's like, okay, let's go through it. Yeah, okay, you meet all the criteria. If you're not sure this project's for you, contact the supervisors. We ensure that they have their email address there. If anyone's got any questions, I'm here to help in the process. They know about the research. We try to keep it open and engaging throughout the process as well. So if the student's selected as a fellow, they're supported throughout the journey as well until the end, and hopefully they enjoy research. So it's been going well so far. And
thank you, Riarna. I've had a couple of students through the undergrad research fellowship on my projects, and they've both been fantastic. And what struck me is how eager they've been to learn about the bigger research process. And I think, when I'm talking to my nursing or my allied health students, we talk a lot about the placements and the value that the placement brings for hands-on learning and training. And this is exactly that same opportunity, but in that research context. And I think it's a fantastic thing. And I think, as you detailed about removing some of those barriers, recognizing and removing some of those barriers to entry at that early stage is so important for making it accessible to all. Riarna, you're very busy because I know at UniSC you also support the Postgrad Students Association. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about the initiatives that group runs to support the PhD students, because that's a student-led association, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I first started in my PhD journey as a student who was in the executive group for the Postgraduate Student Association. So we kind of came full circle here. I started as the student, and now I support them in more of a staff capacity. And it's been fantastic watching the PSA Postgraduate Student Association grow over the years and begin to really engage the students. So Postgraduate Student Association, like you said, it's a group run by students for students. My job is really to support them if they want an event, if they need catering or risk assessments or kind of someone to bounce ideas off of. That's what I'm here to support them for. But we really try to make sure that if issues or opportunities are coming up in the postgraduate space or the research space, that it is students bringing that opportunity forward and not myself going, I think this is the best idea, so I'm not going to consult and I'm just going to run with it. So that students as partners approach has been really important to the success of the group. So We run quite a few events, or they do, I support. One of the most popular has been the postgraduate lunch on the lawn. So this happens on the last Friday of every month. And it's really been an opportunity for our research students to come together and talk about the research journey in a very casual capacity. We have some students who come through and they're pre-confirmation. They're terrified of confirmation, but then we've got some students who are towards their final year and they're able to discuss in that kind of casual capacity what it's all about. It's no longer rules and processes and don't forget to, you know, make sure your thesis is justified, or it's now cool, no, that's totally fine. My supervisors did this for me and I'll reach out to that person, or, oh yeah, I have someone, we share the same survey tools, like let me share my survey with you so you can see how it's set out. And it's been a really great space for people to kind of just connect cross-disciplinary as well. So we have a range of people from, you know, health, business. We've got some education students who come in every now and then, which has been really fantastic. So ensuring that from the get-go, we're crossing those boundaries, those silos that may exist in research as well, and they get to know each other. We have trialed an online version. We've trialed Moreton Bay as well, and that remains ongoing. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there to build that, to make sure we have that sense of belonging in that community as well. Another really popular event for them has been sunset sessions, so presentation practice. Presentations are terrifying, especially when you suddenly need to be the expert. I think Kat spoke about that a little bit, that imposter syndrome, and that, of course, definitely does come up a lot. So being able to present to your peers and hear peer-to-peer feedback. We've got the 3-minute thesis coming up, and we just had a session where I believe we had 5 students at various stages of completion. So some had completed their 3-minute thesis and they really just wanted that roundabout feedback. And some students were presenting ideas. This is the first minute and a half. Where could I take this? And that's really good. I'm glad that students feel comfortable enough to come forward to a place where they know they're going to be supported. They know that students don't mind that it's not 100% completed, it's not perfect, and it's not polished, and they're able to get that feedback. And that's a hybrid opportunity. So we have students from all campuses, rural, regional, and remote, also come forward and, you know, put into present as well. So that's been really great. But we also have like small workshops. So Toastmasters is coming in to give some more presentation practice and practical skills that they can use. And that's been really fantastic. And that was an idea that was fully led by the students as well. And then we also do ad hoc events. So we brought in, you know, human ethics to do a human ethics workshop and recorded that. So students, you know, were able to ask questions very specific to their project, but they may have been too shy to give them a ring to ask initially. So it was more of that, you know, we're here as a community and we're here as a space to build that sense of belonging and let you know that you are able to ask questions. And that is part of the journey and part of the process. So it's been fantastic for them. They're always open to new ideas. So if anybody in the chat decides that, hey, what about this? What about this? Then they're always open to that as well. But they're also looking before we come to our HDR, before you become HDR as well. So they're working with the Graduate Research School at the moment for basically to start a panel on their experience as a master's, as a PhD student, and what that looks like as well. So our honours students can see what's next, because it can be daunting putting in an application and being like, okay, I've got my supervisors, I've got the topic, I have no idea what's next. I know there's presentations and there's a thesis, but what does that actually look like day to day? So that's a really exciting thing they're working on next too. So a few different things here.
We like to speak in acronyms a lot in academia, don't we, Riarna? And in big, you know, even things like, oh, when's your confirmation? And if you're new, you may not know what a confirmation is. And a confirmation is done in different ways at different places. And so, yeah, I agree. Having those brains to pick of people who've just been there and just been through it and are really supportive, it's invaluable. And as you're outlining all of these initiatives, I can see how well they overlay with the framework of student engagement that Kat was talking about earlier. I'm ticking them off in my head. I'm thinking, oh yeah, that's going to address the belonging and the well-being, and then oh, here comes the self-efficacy stuff. So yeah, it's great to see that evidence-based approach to it. Riarna, as a PhD student and a UniSC staff member, what barriers do you see to entry for rural and regional students engaging with postgrad research?
Yeah, so I think this will link a lot to that framework as well. So when I think about barriers, the first two that come up, which is a little bit of my own previous experience as well, is community and understanding. So I myself came from a regional background. The only reason I'm here today is an academic tapped me on the shoulder in my final year and went, Riarna, you could be really good at research. And my first reply was, what's honours? I don't understand, like, what's honours? I thought to be a researcher, you had to go out into industry for a while and then you came back and the university kind of went, oh yeah, you're good enough now to do a research degree. And it was just because I'd never had that education around it. It wasn't a topic. It's not a topic that's spoken broadly about in general society. So if you're first in family like I was, there's no conversation about becoming an academic or what a lecturer looks like or where that goes. So I really think that it would be that's a significant barrier to entry in terms of, you know, understanding what's expected of me. And one of those ways we can, you know, kind of combat that a little bit is education, right? This undergraduate research fellowship program has been really important in educating students from the get-go, but then also making sure those conversations are happening regularly. I have taught a few classes now where we always make sure, well, we do touch on towards the end, hey, there's future pathways, research is a thing, here's how we go, here's where you can engage. And that's something that I'm really glad to see is happening now, because I like to think, and I know there's always room for improvement, that we're starting to have those conversations early and we're bringing it up and we're ensuring students understand that this is an opportunity for them. This isn't something we're going to block off. Online, overseas, in person, research is for everybody, because we know that the research community is vast and different and everyone's doing different things, and yet they still connect in some way, and students are able to be a part of that in some capacity as they go along. But then also community. I find I was online for my undergraduate degree. I kind of accessed my courses and then I left, and if it wasn't being tapped on the shoulder, I didn't know that there was a research community online that I could join. I didn't know that students actually spoke to each other outside of group coursework. So that was a really big learning step for me, but it also helped me to find a community, to understand that other students' research, it's not a weird thing that's just been offered to me. Other students my age research as well. This isn't something I have to go off to industry for 15 years and then come back. And I think ensuring somehow that students know that this community is here, here's community, here's education, will really help to lower those barriers to entry and make ensure students know that it's a safe space, that they're able to ask questions and take chances. And research is about taking chances to an extent, stepping out of your comfort zone and giving it a good shot. So yeah, I think those two are my main ones.
I think that what you're talking about, Riarna, it really nicely captured that challenge around transition to the HDR role that Kat was talking about. And I guess for you in particular, where you were joining online, were you physically distant from the university when you were online? Because I know there was a spell where everybody had to join online, but
yeah, I was physically distant. I think my closest university, my university, was in Brisbane, and I was not. So I never went on campus outside of graduating in the middle of COVID. And then during my honours, when I came to UniSC, it was COVID. So I actually, until my PhD, never got to experience on-campus life. So I think that has, you know, probably changed my perspective and took me a little bit longer to learn about community and the benefits as well. And
on-campus life is very different for a postgrad student than it is for an undergrad student, I think, as well.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing a little bit of your journey, Riarna. I have one more question for you, which is, how do you have time to finish your own PhD? All these other things that you're doing.
Kat loves to mention it. So at the whiteboard in the office, and I can see you laughing already, my colleagues have started a countdown timer. So I submit end of September, and I think we're in the 90s now. But my supervisor, Rory, has been fantastic at cheering me on. He's well aware that I love to say yes to things. He's been very kind about it. But now we're in crunch time. So we've been doing regular meetings and setting aside time. So I swear I'm taking a little bit of a step back to ensure I get it done, and we'll get there. But I think I just love my research. It's that joy in learning that we were talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And it sounds like your supervisor is doing a great job of adding some of that joy into the research process. If Riarna's perspectives have fired any questions for you, then feel free to pop them in the Q&A and we can chat through them in a little while. And I see that Dana has just acknowledged all the work and support that you're doing for the postgrad students at UniSC, Riarna. And yeah, I've sat in many a meeting with you and I know firsthand the time and efforts that you put into that space. So now we'll move on to Kate, Associate Professor Kate Mulgrew, who is, yeah, as I said earlier, as of 2 days ago, the acting Dean of the Graduate Research School. So yeah, it's not very often in a webinar that one of the members gets a promotion in between the times, but congratulations, Kate. I don't think it will change the perspective of what you're talking about here, though, because we're seeing some of those things. So from your experiences as HDR coordinator at a run university, I'm guessing there's not too much experiences as the Dean of the GRS just yet. What are some challenges faced by regional and remote PhD students, and how can we address them?
Thanks, Dan. I'm really struck listening to the other speakers about how similar the things are that I'm going to say, but also how similar my own journey has been to what some other people have spoken about. So I thought I would just start off by briefly ticking off some of the well-established challenges that rural, regional, and remote students face, and then just finish off with some of the things that I think are personally important and that were important to me in my own journey. So you may be familiar in the literature about what some of those established challenges are. Just to do a quick big picture take on that, we know that access to campus and physical resources is difficult, particularly if people need access to equipment. That becomes a whole challenge in and of itself. But also those other skills around reduced ability to network with peers, attending professional development events and conferences. I think now that we're in a post-COVID Zoom-based era, some of those things are a little bit easier, but I still think it doesn't replace the benefits of hallway discussions and popping out and having a physical coffee with people. So I think we need to be mindful of how we host events in a way that encourage people who don't live close to campus. And so these sorts of things can create potentially a sense of isolation and a lack of connection with the university. And we know that these things are critical in predicting university success. We know that financial concerns are of a top priority for people. We know that there are limited scholarships that are available and they're becoming increasingly competitive, but also needing to balance work as well. And when we talk about availability of work, there may be a reduced ability to engage in teaching or research assistant work if the person's not close to campus. And the development of those skills is really important alongside those central research skills as well, because post HDR, we not everyone, but a lot of people end up going into academia, and so teaching and research experience skills are actually as important as holding the PhD. If we can get people into university, we know that unfortunately people from rural, regional and remote areas tend to have lower attainment. It may also be compounded by additional socio-demographic factors if they're from a low SES area, if they're first in family, if they're persons with a disability or First Nations people. And we know that postgraduate degree attainment is twice as high for people living in major cities compared to those in outer regional and remote areas. So it's not just a problem of getting people into some type of program, but then it's also risks to attrition and dropout that may prevent actually kind of finishing that course of study. Of course, I know that there are many other challenges, and I think Kat has done a fantastic job of contextualizing those within the research. And I want to focus on what we can do to address some of those, and also acknowledge that many of these issues are big picture problems and they require coordinated responses from universities and government. But I think that doesn't reduce then what we can do as individuals, as HDR supervisors, and various other roles that we may have. One of the main take-home messages that really struck me from the Accord document was around expanding opportunity for all and encouraging aspiration. And I think this last point is where we have power. And I wanted to share a story with you about my own journey, which was remarkably similar to that of Riarna, which was that I was I came from a low SES area. I was first in not only my immediate family, but my entire extended family to go to university. And so the thought of even having a bachelor's degree was just something that, you know, was completely life-changing within my family. Towards the end of my studies, my 4 years, one of my tutors pulled me aside and said to me, "Have you thought about doing a PhD?" And similar to Riarna, I went, people like me don't do PhDs. And so, you know, she spoke to me about what a PhD was. And what was always stuck in my head as being really touching was her talking about why she thought I would be good at doing a PhD. And it was that I've seen something in you that I think is well matched to this particular career pathway. And I just think that, you know, kind of fast forward 20 odd years, you know, the fact that I'm now acting dean of the graduate research school is a pretty amazing outcome from that conversation. And of course, you know, it's not just one conversation. That PhD is a long journey with lots of things that we need to work through. So, you know, there are ongoing challenges as well, but I always think there's real power in that encouraging aspiration and saying to someone, I see something in you, and trying to kind of, you know, provide those opportunities. So what does that actually look like then in practice? And so I jotted down a few things that I thought were important. Again, not an exhaustive list, but things like attending events, you know, like open days and well, even not just open days, like just any type of event, but being a champion and talking enthusiastically about the benefits of higher education. Providing opportunities at an undergraduate level to showcase our research. And I was at that event, Riarna, on Monday as well, and it was just a phenomenal and inspiring way to start the week. But also, like, you know, as a lecturer, I'll often talk about my own research in my courses, even if it's not related to the course content. I will shamelessly plug. You know, I'll talk about what my PhD students are doing. I'll invite my PhD students in to talk about what they're doing. We'll set assignments that are related to some contemporary field of research that I'm related to, or my PhD students are involved in, so that they can actually kind of get that connection with the topics. Getting guest lecturers in, basically taking an opportunity to expose undergraduate students to a wide variety of research. I'm also a big believer in the power of mentorship, and, you know, being involved, not only having your own mentor, but obviously also providing mentorship for other people as well. Proactively identifying talented students and talking to them and spending time with them and talking to them about what a HDR pathway looks like, but then also supporting our current HDR candidates to try and increase attainment rates. So we know at UniSC that we've got really high attrition rates. And obviously that's a complex set of factors that go into explaining why people drop out, and the kind of things that we can do to support that. But you know, oftentimes I think when we look at these strategies to improve attainment, we kind of like there are those big picture things that need to happen, but often they're not in the control of most of us. It's way above our pay grade. But what I think that we can do is, you know, just reiterating Kat's point about looking after well-being, fostering resilience, bringing joy, and trying to create those aspirational feelings in people.
Hey, as a psychiatrist, it comes down to your locus of control, doesn't it? But I think, you know, what I'm hearing from you is that we can maybe try and gently expand those boundaries of our own individual circle of influence a little bit. And if we all do that, then we're going to have a greater collective influence in this space.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to what extent does the support of HDR students fall on the supervisor versus that broader system?
Yeah, so I think that you know, we touched on that there's some things that need to be driven by the high levels of the university, but even beyond university, you know, the Accord document is talking about changes to the research training program. That's going to be something that's out of our control. But I think for probably of what's most relevant to the people that are attending today, that supervisor-student relationship, I think, is really critically important. And one of the things that has come up previously is making sure that there is a supportive relationship, that you choose that relationship wisely, and that you're able to manage it. I had a giggle because one of the comments that came up in a session that we were in previously about is something that I often say to people as well, that the relationship with your PhD supervisor is often longer than some marriages. And so it doesn't mean that divorce is not an option, but I think that you need to, you need to have those established relationships, and you need to, PhD students are often passionate about a wide variety of things, and I think it's matching the topic with the appropriate supervisor and the appropriate team, because so I think that relationship is super important, but also the ability to model good behaviour as a supervisor. So modelling that, that we look after our well-being, and that sometimes we feel like imposters as well, and that sometimes we get it wrong and we make mistakes, and it's really normalizing what actual proper research and a career in research looks like. That yes, there are those moments of joys, and there's that moment, when that paper finally gets over the line, but also just, it's not all roses all the time. That and yeah, just establishing like what a good productive researcher looks like, and again, that comes back to creating that aspiration.
A lot of the best, peer talks that I've been to around career journeys and fellowships and stuff, it's not necessarily been I got this fellowship and it's a light bulb moment for me, but it's to get this fellowship, I had to go past this, that, and the other, and all these bumps and knocks in the way. And I think I agree with you, Kate, modelling those challenges and how you've got through them, and the supports that were important to you, and learning from that is a really important part of any of our jobs and process.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I often say my career is an example of what not to do. Interspersed with every now and then getting something right. So I'm a really big believer in that.
So we've got about 15 minutes just under left today. So I'll invite anyone who has any questions to pop them in our Q&A now. Dana has put in a question: since the relationship between the supervisor and the HDR student is so critical, is there any support or training for the supervisors to better help them in their supervision? Kate, I guess this is going to come your way.
Yeah, I mean, it is an excellent question, isn't it? Yeah, and so there are a series of workshops, online training modules that are available for both staff and students. And one of the things that is emphasised within the graduate research school is the importance of ongoing supervisor training. That's perhaps less formalized in terms of certain requirements. I've been in other institutions where there was a requirement for supervisors to engage in a certain amount of professional development every year. That's not currently a requirement, but there is certainly access to a lot of resources that supervisors can go to. And I would also like to think that, as that ability to effectively supervise PhD students would be coming up in mentoring discussions that supervisors would be having with their mentor as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with particularly that last point, Kate. I've done some great training around PhD supervision, but some of the best learnings that I've had in that space has been from co-supervising with other more experienced supervisors, and I'm co-supervising a student with Kat at the moment, and it's a great experience, hopefully, for all of us to learn and bring those different perspectives to it. And I don't know if I should be worried about that question or not, because Dana's my PhD student, but I hope not. If not, I will go and brush up my support. So I just wanted to quickly outline what we do at Manna in our HDR community of practice, and I think it hopefully showcases some of the stuff that Kat and Riarna have talked about and evidenced, and then some of the things that you flagged as well. along the way, Kate. In our HDR community of practice, it's led by myself and Dr. Dylan Poulos from the Southern Cross University. And both of us are ECRs, and I think that's quite an important part of the process, because from talking to the students, we're kind of semi-relatable, because we can still remember what it was like to be in their position as an HDR student. And I think that, you know, the further down the journey you get, the grayer some of that stuff becomes. We run a number of different initiatives. We have a monthly expert seminar with some of the Manna senior researchers, where they'll talk about everything from choosing a journal to how you might communicate your research through news-based articles. So really diverse range of more formal knowledge building sessions. But then we also run a shut up and write session twice a week. And the idea of this session is for it to be as loose and student-led, as Riarna said, as possible. Although it's termed shut up and write, there are some times when we need to do much more of the shut up and the writing, because all we do is we come together as a cohort and we talk. And we talk, you know, has anyone got anything they want to talk through today? We've hijacked that session to do practice runs for PhD confirmations, much like you talked about your sessions, Riarna. And all of this is happening virtually, because we're a virtual institute, and our HDR students range from Tasmania across to WA and up to far north Queensland. And we managed to build this connection across us and build this safe space for people to come in and to talk and to feel that they can reflect and learn on their journeys as they go. What was really beautiful for me is that one of our students who did her confirmation practice shared her invitation for the session, and we made up half of the people in that confirmation session of the students just there to support her along the way. And I'm like, oh, we're doing it right, because she's, you know, we're all there to support her. And then in her last slide, she acknowledged the supervisors and the invigilators, and then she acknowledged the support of the Manna community of practice and what it's given her, but then said, and I can't wait to share my learnings and support other people within the COP. And, you know, for me, that summarizes much of what Riarna was talking about, that it's led by the students and for the students. And that's very much the initiative we're trying to do. From a collective and a sense of belonging, and I think probably self-efficacy as well, we've recently, across the month of May, set the group a challenge to co-author an article together, talking about our community of practice and, you know, what it is that we get out of it and why is it beneficial and how do we do it so that others can learn from it. And, you know, it's quite often the perceived digital divide of the more rural you go, the worse the internet connection is, so you can't join online. Well, Riarna, we heard that you did your whole undergrad as an online student, and actually I think the perception of that digital divide is probably worse in many cases than the actual digital divide now, or at least as harmful. And so, you know, we're showing that we can do things through this virtual space, and it provides a space where, when it's not a webinar externally, if you need to just show up and say, I can't have my camera on today because, you know, I've had no sleep, because the dog's been awake or the baby's been awake, and that's fine. And you can engage in the ways that you want to engage. And I think that agency and empowerment is a really important part of what we are doing in that space. And, you know, hopefully we'll be able to share that article with everybody soon. It's got submitted for publication, so fingers crossed. As we draw towards the end, I can see that Liz has shared in the chat the link for our HDR community of practice at Manna. So if anybody does want to join us in that space, you are more than welcome to. We have a Manna Institute symposium coming up in December at the end of the year, which is going to be an opportunity for anybody who's researching around rural and regional mental health and well-being to present on your work. And that's going to be happening in Sydney, and we'll have a number of expert panels and guest speakers as well. I guess to close, if there's no other questions from the floor, I've got a question to put to all of you, or to Kate, Kat and Riarna at least, and anyone who wants to pop an answer in the chat as well, which was, if you had an unlimited pot of money, what would be one thing that you would do to better support rural regional PhD students or HDR students? And I've thrown them because they didn't know they were getting this question, because I thought it up on the fly. So while you're thinking, I'm just going to highlight a couple of things that really stood out for me from your chats today, which are around that need to bring a sense of joy to the research and recognize that it is a journey, and it's a journey that we really want to sow the seeds and start as early as possible. Because if we build that understanding in places that maybe don't have as much exposure to traditional research, then we can expand that opportunity for all. We can encourage that aspiration that you talked about, Kate, And I think we do all have a responsibility to champion higher education research. And, we see, not just in the University Accord, we're seeing big calls for rurally led local research that's led by people in those rural areas. So the need to upskill people in those areas to PhD level to be able to really drive and lead this research is there. And it's a contemporary need, and it's up to us to try and do that. And Kat, I wonder whether there's an opportunity to refine or refocus some of the evidence that you talked about, Kahu and Nelson's student engagement framework, or Kift's transition pedagogy, through that rural and regional HDR lens. I think that would be really interesting stuff to do. So I've given you all a pot of money. What are you going to do with it? Anybody want to jump in first?
I'm happy to jump in, Dan, and I guess
Thank
I
you.
speak from my own PhD experience. I wrote my PhD at my kitchen table. I was a single parent to a very young child at the time, and was not able to access campus very often. So my experience, I guess, was at times my wellbeing took quite a hit throughout the course of that whole journey, really. So I think that something that could be invested in much more is thinking about what sits around wellbeing. What are some of those structural factors that we can address through some wellbeing strategies? And some of the things that jump out to me are, what does childcare look like for people who are trying to study? What does healthcare look like for people who have taken time out of their work to complete their PhD, and whether or not they have good access to healthcare, both physical healthcare and mental healthcare? And I think putting some of those external community supports in place for people that bridge the gap between their world of study and the life load that they're carrying, and just trying to put everything in place so that they can really focus on what they're doing. So yes, if there was an unlimited pot of money, I think lots more wellbeing support that's community and university crossover.
I think, that recognition that there is a life going on for every single one of our colleagues, but our HDR students in particular, that really challenge some of those key tenets of student engagement is such a big thing, Kat. And, it's school holidays here in Queensland today, and I just visited the dentist this morning, so you've ticked 2 of the boxes for me straight away. Riarna, do you want to add your, well, not 10 cents, because hopefully it's more than 10 cents.
I'd love to. I'll add 50 cents.
Okay.
So I think the first thing that comes to mind for me was the scholarship that you can receive as a HDR student. I'm well aware that it is getting harder. I was very lucky when I received it that it wasn't as competitive as it is now. So I can see every year it's compoundingly getting more difficult to achieve. And I have met some students who are doing their honours year and will not continue into their PhD if they're unable to be supported in some way. So I think initially a bit of that pot of money would go towards, supporting students in, whether that is a scholarship or whether that is a grant of some capacity in terms of cost of living, and ensuring students have more equitable opportunity to engage in the PhD or the master's research journey. I'm also thinking about careers. Kate's mentioned that a lot of students want to go into academia, and that is correct. That's conversations I tend to have. That's the next step. And I think sometimes when it comes to supporting those students, there could potentially be funding towards ensuring that they're given positions on as RAs on projects, additional projects, ensuring they're building those skills, maybe a little bit outside of their specific discipline as well. I know a lot of students like to stick where their research is, and there's a whole world out there to engage in. Perhaps, I don't think this is more of a funding one, but ensuring that we have HDRs as tutors in our courses as well to help them build that capacity as well is really important. I loved teaching the students that I got to teach last semester. They were beautiful and lovely, and the conversations were fantastic. It was a really great opportunity that I think more students should get an opportunity to engage in. But then also going to the event space. Obviously, I have the Postgraduate Student Association in mind here. There's a lot of things they want to run, but funding obviously minimizes some of that, or kind of is a reduced delivery. And I think there is a lot more opportunity there to engage students if we have that support network to be able to provide more opportunities for them to engage in that sense of belonging space. But that's just off the top of my head.
Thank you, Riarna. And Kate, to finish up.
And I promise I didn't change my answer after hearing, because it's very funny that it's an amalgamation of both of them. But obviously we need more scholarships. But I quite like the idea of you know, having the central scholarship, but then also a well-being scholarship that goes alongside that helps with childcare, that helps with you know, transport to be able to get to a particular campus or an event if they want to, anything that makes life easier for that person.
I think that would be wonderful. You know, some of our HDR COP members are, those sort of issues are exacerbated because of where you live. You know, they're 3 hours from campus, and it's
Yeah.
not that easy to turn up for a meeting or to, you know, with the best of intentions, join some of the sessions that Riarna runs, because it's 3 hours away. So it's a 6-hour journey, and it's childcare and it's money and it's petrol. And yeah, so I think support to engage in those spaces would be fantastic. Thank you all for your time this morning. It's been a fantastic discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I've got some great quotes to come out of it with as well, and inspiration to go away and continue our work in the HDR community of practice. Thank you everybody who's joined us online here today. And please feel free to reach out via Manna if you have any further questions or would like to know any more about anything that was discussed today. And we will see you all again for our next Manna webinar in July, where the topic is addiction in relation to rural, regional and remote mental health. Thank you.